May 28, 1940, Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring tossed the intelligence report aside, sneering. The report laid out President Roosevelt's latest move, a request to Congress for the wild, almost unbelievable goal of building 50,000 planes a year. Göring barely tried to hide his contempt. The Americans are desperate if they think this nonsense will scare us, he told his staff. They know nothing about real war production. Sure, let them try turning their car factories into plane factories. They'll see soon enough it takes more than an assembly line to build a warplane. But Göring missed something big. In Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him wrong. Knudsen, who'd left behind a $300,000 salary as president of General Motors to work for Roosevelt, for a single dollar a year, was quietly pulling off an industrial miracle. He took charge as Roosevelt's production chief, and right away, he started orchestrating what would become the largest industrial transformation ever attempted. In just 4 years, those same American factories Göring dismissed would not only hit the impossible 50,000 planes a year, they'd crank out nearly 100,000 planes annually, all while supplying 2 different wars on opposite sides of the globe. This all started with a single famous speech on May 16, 1940. German panzers were tearing through France, and Roosevelt stood before Congress and said, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." People scoffed, even among America's allies. Back in 1939, the entire country had made just 3,611 military planes. The Army Air Corps only had 1,700 combat-ready aircraft, most of them outdated. But Roosevelt demanded a 14-fold jump. William Knudsen became the man behind the miracle. When someone asked presidential advisor Bernard Baruch, who could even attempt such a thing, he didn't hesitate. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. Knudsen left behind his old life and brought Detroit's mass production know-how to the world of warplanes. The numbers jumped fast. By December 1941, American factories were turning out 2,000 military planes a month, a 20-fold leap in just 2 years. Ford announced plans for a monster new bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing built out its Seattle operations. Douglas Aircraft went on a hiring spree. The arsenal of democracy was shaking off the rust. The Nazis' refusal to take American factories seriously came from a mix of arrogance and old-fashioned racism. General Friedrich von Bötticher, the German military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sent back solid, accurate reports about what the Americans were up to. In December 1940, he warned Berlin, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." Nobody in Berlin listened. They shrugged it off as defeatist hand-wringing. When Bötticher met with Hitler in early 1939 to talk about American potential, Hitler just ranted about how Americans were racially degenerate and unfit for real war. He called Americans half Judaized, half Negrified, and incapable of sustained warfare. That kind of thinking infected the whole Nazi leadership. Luftwaffe. Intelligence saw reports of women working in aircraft plants and took it as proof of American desperation. They couldn't even imagine that a democracy could outproduce a dictatorship. Reports of factories running 3 shifts were dismissed as exaggeration. Nazi leaders simply couldn't see the reality. Then there was Willow Run, the ultimate American gamble. Ford started building it on open farmland in April 1941. It grew into the world's largest factory under one roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line a mile long. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, promised they'd build one B-24 Liberator an hour when other plants were lucky to finish one a day. It didn't go smoothly. The first bomber finished in September 1942, had to be rebuilt from scratch. Half the planes coming off the line failed quality checks. By early 1943, Willow Run was only turning out 56 bombers a month. Nowhere near what they'd promised. Skeptics called it "Will it run?" But Ford's engineers didn't give up. They broke down the B-24 with its 408 193 parts into manageable subassemblies. They built hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring harnesses, moving assembly lines. In 1943 alone, they handled 578 design changes and kept production going. The numbers jumped. By September, Willow Run made 148 bombers a month. By December, 365. Then in April 1944, they broke through 428 B-24s in a single month, one every 63 minutes, all day, every day. That one factory outproduced the entire German aviation industry. German pilots started to notice the difference during the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes Steinhoff, who led JG-77, put it bluntly in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateur. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day." The truth hit hard, and by January 27, 1943, American bombers were raiding Germany itself. Picture this: 64 bombers hammering Wilhelmshaven. A few months later, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the Americans lost 60 B-17s and then replaced them in just 2 weeks. The numbers just didn't lie anymore. Then came Big Week in February 1944. Over 5 days, the 8th and 15th Air Forces launched 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe lost somewhere between 262 and 355 fighters, but the real blow? About 100 veteran pilots, guys they just couldn't replace. General Galland told Göring the hard truth: Germany was losing 100 fighters every month, but only making 1,000. Meanwhile, America pumped out 12,500 fighters a month and lost just 400. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces, flew over Brunswick in January 1944 and saw an endless river of bombers, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. He and 7 other German pilots went up against them, 8 against hundreds. He called it hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft production was off the charts. That year alone, U.S. factories turned out 96,270 planes, over 16,000 four-engine bombers, nearly 36,000 fighters, and more than 22,000 multi-engine aircraft. In 1 year, America built more aircraft than Germany did in the whole war. But it wasn't just about numbers. Every American bomber bristled with 13 50-caliber machine guns and thousands of rounds. German fighters often took off with half-empty guns. U.S. bombers had powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and navigation gear. German fighters sometimes didn't even have working radios. Boeing's Seattle plant, too, was rolling out 16 B-17s a day. By May 1944. Douglas aircraft, just 68 people in 1936, had exploded to 167,000 workers across 9 facilities. North American Aviation pumped out 500 P-51 Mustangs every month. Lockheed built a P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, constantly tweaking designs for combat. The supporting industries matched the pace. GM produced 57 658 aircraft engines under license. Packard built more than 55,000 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa's aluminum output shot up 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium production jumped from 6 million pounds a year to 333 million. And the workforce? That was a revolution. Women, who made up less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, were 65% by 1943. 310,000 women in the industry. At Douglas Long Beach, more than half the workers were women. Rose Will Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run, hitting 99.5% accuracy. Women inspectors at Douglas slashed defect rates from 3.2 to 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands and, almost by accident, made everyone more efficient. Lighter tools meant less fatigue, and smarter workstations meant fewer injuries. German intelligence looked at all these women and called it desperation. They wrote off these workers as a stopgap, waiting for quality to collapse. Instead, quality shot up. Women excelled at the intricate stuff: wiring, instruments, inspection. Their presence didn't signal weakness, it showed the strength of a democracy at war. While American factories roared, Germany slipped into fantasy. Göring launched the Jaeger program in February 1944, scattering production into 729 underground sites and using slave labor. The Mittelwerk complex alone had 60,000 prisoners packed into hellish conditions. A third of them died. These underground factories churned out more defects than aircraft. Workers sabotaged parts. Moving components between locations delayed everything. Quality control just broke down. The entire Mittelwerk made fewer engines in a month than Ford's Chicago plant. Back in the States, innovation kept rolling. Boeing developed modular B-29 construction across 4 plants. Parts were so interchangeable, you could swap them around with zero trouble. The B-29 was pressurized, cost $65,000 each, and had tech Germany couldn't even prototype. By early 1945, America was making 100 B-29s a month. June 6, 1944, D-Day, showed what this production machine could do. The Allies used 11,590 aircraft against just 319 German sorties. That's 36-1, not just an edge. Total industrial domination. Between January and May 1944, the Allies dropped 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, more than all German bombing of Britain during the war. Allied transports dropped 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more aircraft than Germany ever had for transport. By December 1944, single raids meant 1-200 bombers, with 900 fighters escorting them. P-51 Mustangs could reach Poland, match any German plane, and show up in such numbers that losing a few here and there didn't even matter. German pilots called them Indians because they seemed to be everywhere at once. By the end, even Nazi leaders couldn't deny what was happening. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem like criminal delusions. We tried to fight the world's biggest industrial powerhouse with just words." Before D-Day, RML told his staff straight up, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for everyone we destroy and still crush us. When they land, they'll have so much material no position can hold." Even Hitler, talking to Scherer in January 1945, admitted, "We should have listened to Bertika's reports. Their industrial power decided everything. We built hundreds. They built tens of thousands." Albert Schaar later testified that American bombing hammered German production, tanks down by 35%, aircraft by 31%, trucks by 42%. He didn't hedge. American attacks, methodical and relentless, broke Germany's ability to arm itself. Sure, Germany had the Me-262 jet fighter by mid-1944. It was a real leap, 100 mi faster than anything the Allies had, and Hitler and Göring pinned their hopes on it, thinking this wonder weapon could turn the tide, even though the Allies had the numbers. But Germany only built 1,230 Me-262s and never had more than 200 flying at the same time. The engines needed an overhaul every 10 hours. They didn't have the materials, so they had to cut corners and use whatever they could find. Meanwhile, America started jet development back in 1942. The Bell P-59 wasn't great, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, which was better than anything Germany had, rolled off the line before the war ended. American industry could chase new tech and churn out thousands of reliable fighters at the same time. Germany just couldn't keep up. The production war wasn't about flashy tech. It was about who could build more, faster, and smarter. Germany's fancy jets didn't mean much when America flooded the skies with planes and pushed jet tech at the same time. Quality without quantity? In total war, that's just another way to lose. When U.S. troops from the 36th Infantry Division arrested Göring on May 8, 1945, that was his first real brush with the truth. At first, he kept bragging about German technology at the interrogation facility in Augsburg, insisting they only lost because the Allies had more. Then they moved him to Camp Ashkan in Luxembourg, where Allied interrogators kept at him. By July, Major Kenneth Heckler was interviewing him in depth, writing down Göring's slow realization. "I knew American industry was strong," Göring finally admitted, "but the way you pulled it off was beyond my worst fears. That one factory at Willow Run built more planes than our entire bomber force at its peak. I can't even wrap my head around it." He was especially stunned by American logistics. "You supplied armies across 2 oceans and still kept your own country running. We couldn't even supply our troops 500 miles from Germany, and you kept armies fighting 5,000 miles from home." At Nuremberg, prosecutors hit Göring with hard numbers. Charts showed America building more planes in a month than Germany built in a year by 1944. They played films of Willow Run's endless assembly lines, then named German cities bombed into rubble by those same planes. In his March 14, 1946 testimony, Göring almost sounded lost. "I always thought America's economic and technical power was enormous, especially in the Air Force, but I never dreamed you could ramp up aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. It felt impossible." Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert noticed Göring was obsessed with stats. He'd sit there scribbling ratios, comparing one American factory to all of Germany. He kept coming back to Willow Run, calling it that damned factory that broke our backs. When Gilbert showed him the numbers, 812,615 American aircraft engines versus 241,675 for Germany, Göring just stared, silent. The math spelled defeat as clearly as anything else. Even now, the scale is hard to grasp. America went from building 3,611 military planes in 1940 to nearly 296,000 by the end of the war. That's 97 out of 110 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other planes. This wasn't just about sheer numbers. It was about building a better system from the ground up. 2 million Americans worked in aircraft factories. At the peak, people from every walk of life: women, Black Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, even the elderly. The whole country pitched in. Voluntary teamwork, outproduced forced labor at every turn. The folks who walked into factories in 1941 knowing nothing about planes walked out in 1945 as the world's best aviation workers. They didn't just build planes, they changed how things were made everywhere. Statistical quality control, first developed to build bombers, became the industrial gold standard worldwide. The automation breakthroughs at Willow Run didn't just change one factory, they changed the world. The same engineers who figured out how to build bombers fast enough to win the war went on to design the Saturn V rocket. The women who spent their days riveting B-24s raised the next generation, the kids who would actually walk on the moon. That production miracle didn't fade after the war ended. It kicked off the era people now call the American century. The financial side of things was just as wild. Aircraft production swallowed up $45 billion in 1940s dollars, around $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone cost more than the entire Manhattan Project. But instead of leaving the country broke, All that war production made America richer than ever. The Depression's stubborn unemployment problem vanished. People's incomes doubled between 1940 and 1945. Workers themselves bought huge amounts of war bonds straight out of their paychecks to keep factories humming. At Willow Run alone, workers chipped in $45 million, enough to fund their own plant's operations. Meanwhile, Germany tried to match American output and failed hard. By 1944, they'd thrown 40% of their entire industry into aircraft production, yet still managed to build less than half of what the US did. They leaned on forced labor, but that backfired. Sabotage was everywhere, quality tanked, and productivity actually dropped after 1943. While American productivity soared up 300%, German efficiency collapsed. The factories built for war didn't shut down when the fighting stopped. They found new lives. Aluminum plants that once made bomber parts started churning out materials for the suburbs. Chemical plants that made aviation fuel switched to plastics for everyday goods. Machine tool factories that built airplane parts retooled for whatever American industry needed next. But it wasn't just about making more stuff. It was about how everything worked together. The War Production Board managed to coordinate 184,000 different companies, all moving in sync. IBM punch card machines tracked millions of parts from thousands of suppliers. MIT's Radiation Lab, 4,000 scientists strong, came up with navigation systems that let bombers fly in any weather. The US didn't just outproduce the Axis, they adapted faster. When the B-17s turned out to be vulnerable from the front, Boeing added chin turrets in just 60 days. When the Pacific called for longer-range planes, Consolidated tweaked the B-24s on the fly without ever stopping production. German aircraft took months or even years to change. American designs improved week by week. This constant evolution was a game changer. Insights from Pacific battles reached engineers almost immediately, and their fixes showed up on assembly lines within days. Workers on the line could suggest improvements directly to designers. That kind of open, democratic flow of information beat the rigid German command structure at every turn. In the end, even the enemy noticed. On the night before his execution, Hermann Göring wrote a final letter admitting the truth. America won because of its factories, not its soldiers. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories, he wrote. The country he once mocked for making consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. He told psychologist Gilbert, "We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they revolutionized production itself." Göring killed himself that night, but his final words said it all. A single American factory could outbuild his entire Air Force's lifetime total. Military historians agree America's production power was the turning point. Without it, D-Day couldn't have happened, the bombing campaign would have fizzled, and the Pacific War would have been unwinnable. Richard Overy, a top historian of the air war, put it bluntly. The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies didn't just edge out their enemies, they buried them in sheer numbers. By 1944, America alone was building more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined. This wasn't a small advantage. It was dominance on a scale Germany simply couldn't survive. But the story doesn't end with victory. That production miracle proved something bigger, that democracy outperforms dictatorship, that freedom beats tyranny, and that people working together by choice accomplish more than any system built on force. The people who pulled off this transformation weren't slaves or forced laborers. They were free citizens working together toward a common goal. When Hermann Göring sneered at America's ability to produce, he made one of history's biggest mistakes. That arrogance didn't just cost Germany the war, it cost millions of lives. Göring completely missed what Americans could do, and that doomed the Third Reich long before the first bombers crossed into German airspace. Look at the numbers. America went from building 3,000 planes a year to 100,000. Free societies, when threatened, didn't just rise to the challenge, they shattered expectations. Roosevelt's target seemed crazy, but American workers doubled it. They didn't just keep up with Germany, they outpaced them 5 times over, even while fighting another war in the Pacific. There's a lesson here for today's leaders. If you brush off democracies as soft because they prefer peace, or if you think free people can't get things done, you're begging for a disaster. America in 1940 looked unready for war. 4 years later, it was a giant, cranking out weapons faster than anyone thought possible. The arsenal of democracy turned factories into front lines. Workers on the assembly line became as vital as soldiers in the field. Industrial power ended up mattering just as much as battlefield tactics. Göring realized this only when it was too late, when his country lay in ruins. From the moment he scoffed at Roosevelt's 1940 speech to his execution at Nuremberg in 1946, Göring's story traced the destruction of Nazi Germany. His contempt for American industry became the epitaph of the Third Reich, a regime that confused hate for strength and thought ideology could beat out cold, hard production. The Reichsmarshal, who laughed at America's aircraft goals, died knowing that U.S. factories in 1944 alone pumped out more planes than Germany managed in the whole war. His joke about democracy's supposed weakness turned out to be the most costly punchline in history. America built 295,959 military planes. Germany managed 94,677. But the real triumph wasn't just in the numbers, it was in how those numbers happened. Free workers outproduced forced labor. Cooperation outshined command. A nation built by immigrants and outsiders came together and did the impossible. Every B-24 rolling off the Willow run line 1 every 63 minutes was more than just a plane. It was democracy's answer to tyranny. Each rivet hammered by a woman who'd been baking pies a few months earlier. Each engine put together by a teenager who left high school to serve. Each wing assembled by someone who'd escaped poverty or persecution. These people proved that when free citizens unite for the right cause, they can bury tyranny in a mountain of production. Göring scoffed at America building 50,000 planes a year. America doubled it and changed the course of history. His laughter still echoes, not as mockery, but as a warning about underestimating free people. In the end, democracy's arsenal, nearly 300,000 planes, buried Göring and everything he stood for. His contempt built his own defeat, one aircraft at a time.